Hello, welcome back to the dark room from a crime show that takes place in the 90s. I am a developing photo from the crime scene that shows the person the protagonist just left with is actually the murderer. I hope the sidekick that hasn't yet proved their worth to the force rescues them. Comedians. They were created 6,600 years ago on the island of Patmos, and they are direct descendants of the devil. Some people say that comedians are contemporary philosophers, truth tellers, and agnostic sages of our times. I say that might be true for the women, but a lot of the men they're just, predators, I think. I hate when people call comedians truth tellers because most of the things they say on stage are complete lies. You think they love your city? You live in Naperville, Illinois. The only things that love your city are locusts. Really though, comedians are just entertainers by a different name because the title comedian is pretty vague. You could call George Carlin a comedian, and you could call Dane Cook a comedian. Dane Cook is a comedian in the way that Jordan Peterson is a professor. You know, it's like a technicality that was decided on by a group of Dark Age Luddites huddling around a blood-soaked whetstone, and it should be recanted. You could call anybody a comedian. You know, Anderson Cooper is a comedian. His smile is more than coy enough. He looks like a storybook fox who just stole porridge. In the 20th century, the role of comedians was to be hit in the face by a pie and then fall off of a steam engine while wearing a pork pie hat in a black and white film, and then occasionally they tap dance with a cane. But all of a sudden we have this massive fucking bout of self-importance? What's the point, right? Real philosophers write dissertations about metaphysics and ethics, but whenever a comedian writes a book, it's just like 15 essays, and most of them are about erectile dysfunction and getting a colonoscopy when you hit 50, and how silly it is, and then also how their wife doesn't like them because they're not into women's suffrage. Their skulls are too thin to contain thoughts about infrastructure. Yes, thank you for asking. I am a truth teller. But today we're not just talking about any comedian or entertainer. We are talking about one of the internet's and broader comedy's sweethearts, John Mulaney. You ever seen a human heart? Come on. Come on. Wait a minute. That's not a human heart. That's state-of-the-art, top-of-the-line Raycon earbuds. Raycon has sleek, wireless earbuds for every scenario at a price at about half that of other audio brands. I couldn't imagine anything better, right? These things are real comfortable. They got about 8 hours of battery life, depending on how you use them, and 48,000 5-star reviews. Pause. Future Rose here. Did you know that it's actually 50K 5-star reviews now? Yeah, because they're just that good. And also, they come with little adjustable gel tips so that they fit your ears no matter what. And also, it's like a 32-hour battery life, which is just insane. They just don't die. And also, if you buy them, it helps my channel. Pause again. Did you also know that Raycons have wireless charging and also are compatible with Siri and Alexa? Unpause. That's called play. Play. And also, did you know that when I think about death, I get like really scared. Can we go back to the That's more than Morbius methinks. Right? Camera guy gets it, right? Come on. Check out how they stay in my ears even when I do the dance I do, when the fire ants that have built a colony under my bed get in my ears while I sleep. Get out, get out, get out! Still there. Come on now. I use these guys to listen to new music. That's a joke. I've never listened to music before. I use them to listen to sound, but actually I do use them to listen to my demos because they have really good bass. A lot of like wireless earbuds or smaller earbuds don't have good low end, but these ones are like really hard hitting. So I use them a lot for that. So yeah, click the link in my description to get 15% off your order. Go to buyraycon.com/row. All right, now where do you think this human heart went, right? Future Row, you can take it away. Hello, welcome back to the channel. If you subscribe right now, I'll steal the copy of The Art of War by Sun Tzu that was on your college boyfriend's bookshelf. And what he did to you was so uncool. My number's in the description. How are we all doing today? You know, I'm feeling like a failure of pedagogical indoctrination. My grandparents fled the Soviet Union, and here I am preaching commie propaganda to the peanut gallery. Not a slight to any of you, I just don't think any of you would be dumb enough to pay a lot of money to see me, you know? I respect that. You're mezzanine folk. Today, though, I'm actually conflicted because John Mulaney is not somebody that I hate. Most of the people who I criticize on this channel, I hate, you know? Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Tom McDonald, the rat that lives in my foyer and makes me pay rent. I better be getting my security deposit back because I'm not the one chewing holes in the wall. Tough crowd, huh? It's tough. It's dead silence in this fucking room. I feel like a delusional child playing pretend. I think I must have found John's stand-up back in 7th or 8th grade, while everybody else in my grade was concerning themselves with being allowed to play Black Ops 2 and wearing a Fitbit at their small age. I was deep in the Netflix recommended category looking for stand-up gems, and before you ask, no, my mother will not tell me what sex is. The virgin jokes are outplayed. Let's all level here. I've had sex before. I know it sounds like I'm bragging, but I promise I'm bad at it. Last time I had sex, I spent like 15 minutes looking for my penis, only to to realize I had already returned it the day before. I have seen John Mulaney's comedy specials an unreasonable amount of times. New in Town, Comeback Kid. I saw Kid Cord just live. Oh Hello. Even that like terrible Seinfeld ripoff sitcom he did. I tried a few episodes of when it came out. This is to say that I think John Mulaney is really funny. It's been a hot take lately to come out and say that you think John Mulaney was mid or never actually thought he was that funny, but I don't believe that. At least for my sense of humor, he has always been pretty dead on, and I enjoy the stuff that he writes and performs for the most part. But recently, John Mulaney's reputation as a sort of golden boy in comedy has taken a bit of a nosedive. Okay, so there are a few things that happened in quick succession the last few years, and I have to set the stage before I get into the main offense, which is kind of detached from the rest of the stuff he did, but it is influenced from a cultural perspective by it. John Mulaney experienced a relapse. Apparently it had been going on for a while, but it became public knowledge early on into COVID. He had talked about his drug and alcohol addiction before publicly, even in specials, but he had also said many times that he was clean, he had stopped drinking, so this surprised and shocked a lot of people, folks who were worried about his health, and that was very reasonable, in my opinion. I think that if an artist or a performer whose stuff you enjoy is going through a very hard time in their life to the extent that they feel the need to seek medical help, it is an understandable reaction to be upset, worried, or to want more details. What happened next was a bit curious, though. So John Mulaney got out of rehab, and people started noticing that some things were changing. Him and his wife weren't like following each other on social media or something, and you know, just like random little breadcrumbs. So basically, rumors started spreading that maybe John and his wife, Anna-Marie Tendler, were not on good terms. This was a big deal to a lot of people who had developed a parasocial relationship with John's onstage persona, because he talked a lot about loving his wife, about thinking she was cool. Basically, in their eyes, he had been the antithesis of the classic, like, I'm a comedian, I hate my wife joke. So as urban legends go, people were like, John Mulaney and his wife got separated, I'm so sad, they were so good together, blah, 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 which I think is where things started to get weird. You know, we didn't have any personal stake or insight into how their relationship was progressing on a day-by-day basis, so we couldn't possibly know what the intricacies of their relationship looked like, or if they were a good standard for love past what John Mulaney had said in special. The fact that these people were taking to social media being like, oh, I'm personally sad and my perception of relationships and love is broken because I looked up to these people as a good, normal couple, maybe tells us a bit about how people thought of and treated John Mulaney at the time, as a sort of golden boy with a quick wit and a steady, healthy relationship. But in reality, we don't actually know most of these things about his life, and lo and behold, not only did information come out shortly after that John Mulaney had split from Anna-Marie Tendler, but that he had started dating other celebrity, Olivia Munn, and had gotten her pregnant. People treated this as a sort of epic betrayal story about how quickly John had recovered and just gotten somebody pregnant, and some of them eagerly cited pieces from like his 2015 special where he said he didn't want kids. This is where we start to get into some of the even weirder aspects of the parasocial relationship. There are people who thought that they could take his words from a comedy special recorded in 2015 and apply them to a scenario almost half a decade later, actually over half a decade later. In the same bit from that special, he also says he's not sure of the future and what he would want from it, so it's like, those words didn't mean anything, you know, we didn't know if he wanted a kid because we don't know him. Despite all of this, the timeline of like the divorce and rehab and everything and the new relationship is kind of disputed. Some tabloids claim to have information that John Mulaney cheated on his wife with Olivia, seeing as John and Olivia had met before John asked for a divorce from Anna, and there's just a lot of chatter about like what happened and how it happened, because to onlookers it was a really rapid series of events. They didn't see anything building, they didn't see behind the scenes. John Mulaney going from the wife guy cherished in the eyes of especially young queer and non-male viewers to back to rehab and immediately divorcing his wife, whom he had been married to for 7 years, to marry another woman and quickly have kids with her, gave people a lot of whiplash. Wait, I'm stupid. I don't think he actually got married to Olivia Munn, but he has a child with her. That's arguably more important, maybe. But all of this would not have caused as much of a scene had John Mulaney not have had this reputation as a sort of feminist, progressive adjacent comedian, where other comedians went right and he went left. Intense parasocial relationships can be unavoidable for some people, yes, and maybe parasocial relationships as a whole are even unavoidable together in our internet age. But the ones built between John Mulaney's young fan base and his public persona were really interesting ones. He was, as an op-ed I read recently stated, one of the good ones, a comedian who made his name not off of misogyny or bigotry, but tightly written witticisms and observation. His look and sound also helped too. In a way, Mulaney feels pulled from another generation. He talks like an old-timey radio show host and frequently dresses in full suits and pointy dress shoes. For others, it might make them daunting, but even Mulaney's Netflix special descriptions assert that he has a boyish charm about him. He's quick on his feet and non-confrontational. As he said, he's the type of person you could pour soup in his lap and he'd apologize to you. He's very aware of this, and I'm hesitant to say that he weaponized it, but it was very helpful in his climb to comedy fame. All of this comes together to mean that he not only has broad appeal, but he appeals to demographics young white male stand-up comedians might have trouble appealing to in the first place. Young women and young queer people who often feel targeted or displaced by the material of comedians, even people of color who are weary of racist jokes, could come to Mulaney's specials and see that most of his material, while not strictly family-friendly, is not directly offensive. But none of this is even what people are mad about, strictly speaking. What I'm trying to illustrate is that Mulaney's public perception is wildly different right now than it was even just 2 years ago, to the extent that some of the fans of his work could be wavering in their adoration. Now to the big fuck-up of it all, and the reason why I wanted to make this video in the first place. Chappelle. Dave Chappelle is an American comedian who has been contentious for probably upwards of 2 decades now, since his meteoric rise through stand-up and The Chappelle Show, which was a comedy sketch show that centered around like political and racial comedy in many forms. After Chappelle's wildly successful stint on television, though, he disappeared for many years, returning in 2013 to perform stand-up, and finally landing a deal with Netflix to release 3 stand-up specials with them in 2016. Chappelle is one of the most revered stand-up comedians and writers, not just in our generation, but of all time, which is why what made what happened next so fucking annoying. In Chappelle's following specials with Netflix, which ended up being more than just 3, he's made quite a few of them, he ended up getting into some heat with the trans community about jokes about trans people that were kind of fucked up and dehumanizing and alienating. And in the last year or so, Chappelle has not only doubled down on all of those jokes, he has come out in defense of J.K. Rowling and identified himself as a TERF, a trans-exclusionary radical feminist. But what is that, right? TERFism, if that's what you want to call it, is an incredibly hateful and disgusting ideology that basically posits that trans people are lying and that we're broken, damaged individuals that need to be saved from ourselves or, yeah, eliminated altogether because we're trying to infiltrate women's spaces. TERFism is often directed specifically at trans women. I'm trying to keep it cool, but when one of the biggest comedians alive sides with one of the biggest authors alive to support a movement that wants me either closeted or dead, I get a little fucking mad. Chappelle has, of course, faced backlash for this, as has Rowling, because TERFism is ideologically incoherent as it asserts itself as radical feminism that is also inherently opposed to inclusion of trans women, especially ignoring what gender is and seeking to paint trans women as predators or groomers or whatever else horrendous bullshit they want to do. TERFism and radfems also frequently find themselves siding with weirdly regressive takes on homophobia. And now, not 3 weeks ago, John Mulaney brought Dave Chappelle on stage as an opener and allowed him to make jokes about trans and gay people to a crowded audience in which there were trans and gay people because, yeah, they assumed that John maybe wasn't a spineless dickhead that would platform a bigot whose rhetoric endangers their livelihood. I assumed that, in fact, but I was wrong. Everything that had happened with John Mulaney, I cared a minimal amount about. I had to start clicking not interested on tweets about his rehab and divorce scandal because I was sick to my stomach reading think pieces on the state of love and relationships in the wake of this heartbreaking revelation because, newsflash, I don't know these people personally, and I don't actually have that much stake in what was going on there. Sure, I was bummed maybe, but people really had their eggs in that basket to a weird extent. 5 months ago, in fact, I was considering making a video about how weird people were about that, but I decided against it. And now here I am having to make a video about how John platformed a bigoted, transphobic ideologue, seemingly out of the blue. But my question is, was that really out of the blue? It should not be our jobs to carefully analyze the steps of every public figure to make sure they don't do anything really fucked up, but sometimes we have to. Yet it seems like people genuinely weren't expecting this. Were there signs that we could have picked up on? And would they have even been indicative enough of amiability to bigotry of any kind for us to have arrived at conclusions? I want to know, so I went and I rewatched John's 3 specials to see if there was anything I could extrapolate. Okay, so a few disclaimers about these sections. One is that they get shorter as time goes on. The New in Town one is sizable enough, Comeback Kid is shorter, and the Kid Gorgeous one is virtually non-existent, although I will talk about Oh Hello and Stefan as well in that one, and those are important pieces of what I'm going to say. The second thing is we are not doing normal analytical work. We are doing things the ridiculously pedantic, fastidious way, okay? Anything that could be even slightly interpreted as off-color, offensive, problematic, edgy, or even weird, I'm going to try to point out and reckon with, to try to understand how we can build to this point. This is not because I think that these things, these jokes, are unacceptable necessarily, okay? There are going to be bits in here that I critique for 2 minutes that I like, or I don't even care about all that much. I don't think they're too wrong. But nonetheless, I want to dig into the details to see if there is anything, even subtextual, that could have tipped us off about behavior like the platforming of Dave Chappelle in the future. I'm also going to be highlighting anything I think is even remotely interesting. This is just a sort of vengeful deep dive into one of my favorite comedy specials. First things first, I had a lot of fun rewatching these. I still think they hold up. Mulaney is a great writer and performer. Second thing second, and this is something that I think a lot of people sort of skim over, John Mulaney is kind of edgy. Every single time I do a video, people say that my hair looks like I just rolled out of bed, and I can't help it. I washed this 2 hours ago. I've brushed it. I hired a mother cat to come and lick my head, and it still looks like this. But yeah, John Mulaney is a little bit edgy, not in like an Anthony Jeselnik gallows humor sense, but compared to the young progressive audience he managed to garner, it surprises me that he rose to such prominence from this special, even though it was released in 2012, so standards were a bit different. Okay, so let's get into it. Some of the first jokes in this special are reinforcing the greater cultural perception of Mulaney. There are jokes about how he looks young, like an old child, and that he's had anxiety. He has always been a nervous person. So we immediately get where the roots of the boyish charm come from. And also we get a hint of vulnerability. We definitely wouldn't usually expect a tall white male comedian in a tailored suit to come out and talk about his childhood anxiety, so our defenses are down. Something I've noticed that he does in his comedy is that he will use stereotypes or caricatures, but he will palliate them through his proximity to them. The best example of that in this special is he does portray his mother as a bit neurotic and gossiping, something that we might associate with casual misogyny had he not presented it the way that he does. For instance, instead of saying that his mother likes drama, he says he's becoming more like his mother because he was watching TV, they announced an interview, and he said, "Ugh, this ought to be good." He also says that his mother is like Nancy Grace in that she makes wild accusations and expects something to stick, which is laid in opposition to the caricature of his father as a very steadfast, conservative, old-fashioned type of like cerebral man. There are a few moments in this special where John Mulaney uses a black accent to get his joke across, imitating some sort of nebulous black American accent, perhaps the most obvious of which is his imitation of a Def Jam comedian where he liberally curses to get this caricature across. These black accents are amongst the things in the special that I do think are a bit gross and unacceptable. I don't think they were necessarily essential to the routine, but clearly he had workshopped them and they had gotten good laughs, you know? This was 2012. I mean, this was before the peak of like Your Fave is Problematic and the large-scale rise of accountability culture. So as we move through his specials, we see stuff like this dwindle a bit in relevance, perhaps because he understood it wasn't good optically and would rather it was not attached to his personal material. One of the earliest segments in the special is John Mulaney's experience as a child when he was bullied for being perceived as a young Asian boy. He does use a slur in this segment, but he immediately lambasts it for being a lazy slur, one that took not much effort. Do I think this makes it okay? No, but do I think it softens the blow to an audience? I guess, yeah, which is why he might not have gotten backlash for it. He then talks about how he's insecure about being high-waisted and having feminine hips, and how his voice was high when he was a child, so he was mistaken as a woman when he was younger. He also makes fun of his own driving, saying that he is an awful driver. And all of this slowly consolidates into a really approachable image. Mulaney is clearly not worried about being perceived as weak and vulnerable, and because of that, he ends up seeming almost inviting, even when there are off-color deliveries or jokes that maybe wouldn't be as acceptable. They end up sort of washing over the audience because he's giving off the energy of somebody who seems trustworthy, whatever that may mean for a public entertainer. This is why, although I do have problems with the people who became very uncritically invested in Mulaney's personal lives or became stans, I do understand why he seemed like a relatively harmless figure. His actions didn't seem to build to anything. Rather, they even frequently were cut through with denunciations or derision of hatred. In an interesting case in this special, he uses an anecdote about when he got into a fight with a TV executive about a pejorative term for little people, one that I consider a slur, one that is liberally used by Mulaney in this bit. However, in this bit also, he ends up defending the seriousness of the N-word, leading to one of his most famous quotables: "If you're comparing the badness of two words and you won't even say one of them, that's the worst word." In the same breath, he says that he doesn't want to gloss over what little people have been through in this country, and implies that it's ridiculous to compare it to the plight of African Americans. So now we're seeing a bit of the woke persona people have applied to him peek through, you know, even if it is in a kind of strange, offensive segment. We get both a defense of the seriousness of slurs. He also says a slur, and then asserts that the plight of Black Americans is very serious. A lot more happens in this special. He makes fun of the New York Post, which is a conservative newspaper, which bolsters our perception of him as a progressive man. Cool. Towards the back end of the special contains more of the curious stuff, material that would not play as well today because it was recorded a decade ago. Mulaney says that he is probably gay, kind of alluding to himself as a flamboyant stereotype, saying that God forgot to flip the final switch to make him fully gay. He says that most little boys are gay. They are flowy and have very hard opinions on things. He impersonates a gay man many times, and then he says that girls couldn't do Ocean's 11 because two of them would break off to gossip about the others. This is wild to me because on paper, it feels very homophobic and misogynistic, but in action, it doesn't feel exactly that way. Mulaney also does a whole bit on how he likes Jewish people and dating Jewish women because they tell you what they're thinking, and says that he's gonna get playfully anti-Semitic. Now, the biggest thing I took away from this special is that Mulaney is really good at creating degrees of separation between the edgy things that he says and the reactions they would elicit by controlling his proximity to them. For instance, he can't be homophobic for saying that being flowy and having hard opinions makes a little boy gay, because of course he seems gay and he doesn't seem to have a problem with that. His comment on liking to date Jewish women and alluding to stereotypical neuroticism can't be fetishistic or anti-Semitic, because of course he's engaged to and in love with a Jewish woman. He can't be portraying an annoying, maladjusted mother stereotype, because of course he says he's like his mother, and he is constantly making jokes about how effeminate he is. Oftentimes, if there is to be a joke at somebody else's expense, he is also taking the fall for it. There is a bunch of weird shit plastered into these jokes. I don't think that it's acceptable to say those things about gay people or Jewish people, but I think they do in fact set the stage for what he ended up doing later on. Okay, very short section. What's weird here, right? There is much less, but the weirdest thing is that he says he got a Jewish wife and that he did it. He also calls her bossy and says that marriage is like supervision. The stuff he says about his wife is not wife guy shit, honestly. He clearly, loves her and thinks she's cool, and he says that he respects her, but there are a lot of weird comments about her Judaism being something that John Mulaney jokes about a lot in the future and in the past before this. The fact that the first thing a lot of people thought when they saw John Mulaney was that he loved his wife is reflective of the lenience we were giving him, even though he was doing the bare minimum and sometimes less. We thought that he was society's golden wife guy. That means that the bar is in fucking hell. Okay, I genuinely almost have nothing on Kid Gorgeous. I took notes for everything, and it really looked like half a page New in Town, quarter of a page, and then nothing for Kid Gorgeous. But here is where I'm going to try to synthesize and talk about Oh Hello and Stefan. What I meant earlier by John Mulaney's jokes setting the stage for what he ended up doing later on is that I think what John Mulaney did with Chappelle is not massively different from what he did in a piece like Oh Hello or Stefan for SNL. That's going to be a controversial statement, so let's unpack with a few disclaimers, those being that I think Oh Hello is one of the funniest things I have ever seen, and Stefan has almost made me cry laughing multiple times. Another disclaimer being that I don't think that this necessarily means that the impact or the damage of these things are the same, but I think that they exhibit some of the same qualities. Mulaney is an amazing comedy writer, and he's maybe better at towing the line between damaging humor and borderline advocacy for groups than any other I have seen, but I feel that mostly about his solo stand-up work. When he becomes solely a writer or portrays a character, things diverge. And also when you are constantly towing the line between damaging a community and bolstering them, you are at likelihood of stepping in either direction, not just bolstering them. Let's look at Oh Hello, for example, a comedy play of sorts where Nick Kroll and John Mulaney take the roles of elderly men from New York City, elderly men who are considerably bigoted. There are jokes in this special about how bad immigrants' food smells that are played for relatability. There are passing mentions of those fucking Dominicans, and there is an imaginary Indian stagehand named Ravi who they demean racially on occasion, calling him Slumdog, an allusion to the film Slumdog Millionaire. These jokes are much more offensive than really anything in John Mulaney's solo catalog because he is in character. However, some of the jokes end up reading like something that could be in John Mulaney's stand-up set, but he's smart enough to put them in something his personal comedic voice is a little more separated from. The same thing with Stefan. Stefan is a gay caricature written by a cisgender heterosexual man, okay? Part of the running gag is how he hits on Seth Meyers and how they enjoy a gay romance arc together. These sketches are also full of pejorative terms for little people, one of the slurs being a recurring staple of the act. So when I ask myself, could I have predicted that John Mulaney would say things in his act that could disparage the LGBTQ+ community, I might say no, but if I ask myself, could I imagine that Mulaney would platform somebody who would, I also might say no. Even though Mulaney's edgy humor is right there, I wouldn't have been able to see it. His most famous character is a full-on fucking gay caricature, written by him, a straight man, portrayed by Bill Hader, a straight man. Even though I know that both of these men are probably not homophobic, to think that it evaded me entirely that he could perpetuate bad ideas about the broader LGBTQ+ community is wild to me because it feels like the writing was on the wall. But really, I could not have seen it coming. I just couldn't. Mulaney seemed so self-aware and malleable to societal expectations that I didn't expect him to platform somebody like Chappelle. So is there even a way to stop shit like this from happening? There is a plague spreading rapidly through society, and I call it exceptional white guy syndrome. Now, in identifying this affliction, I am not trying to insinuate or assert that white men cannot be good allies or even good people. I just am trying to say that they might get idolized for less than like non-white non-men. So when they fuck up, they might fall from a higher pedestal than maybe they logically should have been sitting on. Who are some of these people? Well, at risk at being killed by an angry mob of people who have cards in their bio, Minecraft YouTubers. These are young white people, often men, who have done nothing really to necessarily speak up for or out for the rights of the marginalized other than be the comfort creators of other people who do speak up for those groups. Remember that time Dream said that he would donate all of his money from streaming during Pride Month to LGBTQ organizations and then he didn't stream like all month? And also he had a privated, ironic KKK fan cam on his YouTube channel. That shit was fucking weird. This is where things start to fall apart, right? The stan culture of it all. You get these really, really young, really passionate, really easily influenced, and sometimes naive people who have really progressive, really leftist politics, who are standing these creators that just do not align with these politics. To deviate a bit from exceptional white guy syndrome, you can see this in K-pop, you can see this with actors, you can see this with the gaming creators that I mentioned earlier, and yeah, you can see this with John Mulaney. Specifically in the K-pop community, it strikes me as odd because of the epidemic of anti-blackness in the K-pop industry, but to smaller extents with any person who has a fan base or stan base, it makes little sense to me. Of course, that's not exactly exceptional white guy syndrome, but it's adjacent. It's this cultural symptom of celebrity obsession. It's the de-emphasization of tabloid culture and blogs and reintroduction of high-octane gossip and discourse spaces in the shape of Twitter communities. So when a young community of really progressive people all coalesce around a white guy who is not necessarily perfect politically, there may be pressure to kind of delude yourself about exactly who they are, mythologize them, even to a certain extent. When we find a comedian like John Mulaney who doesn't talk about hating his wife or minorities, we may want to ascribe to him values and morals that he does not actually espouse. What role do these people fulfill culturally, though? Well, this video is not a video about daddy issues, although I have plenty of those, let me tell you, but older male celebrities who have kind of progressive politics and are likable often are comforting to some of us because they represent something that can be absent in our lives. A lot of people lack men that they can trust in their lives for a myriad of reasons. Patriarchal masculinity and conditioning could be holistically poisonous to the extent that it makes sense for some people to not have any male friends at all. I am lucky to not be in this category. I have many friends who are men and people I can look up to who are men who are really great, but this is not the case for all people. So a figure like John Mulaney or like Dream or like Bo Burnham, one that is seemingly self-aware or comforting because they do not externalize bigotry or misogyny to the extent of others, can fulfill a personal gap for some people, especially young non-male people. However, sometimes in pursuit of a figure who will give us ease, we end up totally forgetting to analyze who the person is and like what they do. John Mulaney wrote on SNL for years and remains friends with members of the cast like Pete Davidson, who is a weirdo who dated an 18-year-old when he was 27, which made even her parents uncomfortable. This isn't to say that working on SNL requires a complete moral upheaval, but it does require you to associate with people who may not be great, whether they be writers, actors, or especially the hosts. Let's not forget that fucking Donald Trump hosted. But I digress. What I'm trying to say is that if you have liked John Mulaney's comedy in the past, that's fine. You know, I'm not trying to belittle you or tell you that you're stupid for not seeing things. You just have to stop extrapolating his act into some sort of saint-like mental image of him because, one, you're ignoring key aspects of that act and his public behavior, and two, it's just an unhealthy, weird thing to do with celebrities, and it's something that we kind of have to scale back on. This whole video, in fact, was inspired by a tweet that said people are obsessing over Bo Burnham like we didn't just learn from John Mulaney, and not for the reason you might think, actually. I'm gonna do something I never thought I would. I'm gonna go up to bat in defense of Bo Burnham. So we couldn't really know that John Mulaney would fuck us this bad, right? Platform somebody this nasty. There are small things we could extrapolate about his comedic philosophy and his touring that could have hinted at a broader rejection of ubiquitous political correctness, but nothing that could have indicated, hey, this guy is going to give the stage to a scumbag that is peddling an ideology that wants trans people dead. Like, we could not have reasonably said, this is what's going to follow. However, the idea that we can extrapolate this lesson learned from John Mulaney onto Bo Burnham is not necessarily accurate, and this is from somebody who is very critical of Bo's work, so please hear me out. I used to be obsessed with Bo Burnham in like late middle school, early high school, so I've seen like all of his shit, every special, every interview. I used to be active on his subreddit, the whole embarrassing 9 yards. Bo as a celebrity is different from John Mulaney as a celebrity, and I do not think that we could expect this specific behavior from him. For one, Bo is kind of a recluse. He doesn't do interviews that way, he doesn't perform that often, and he is definitely skeptical of hierarchies in a political sense in a way that we do not know John Mulaney is. Bo's comedy, while edgier and more fucked up and sometimes ironically ideologically regressive than John's, is also, in a weird way, a bit more progressive and cutting edge. We also have been told more about Bo's ideology, his politics, etc. We don't know either of these people personally, but I think in the same way that it is not fair to take the cumulative missteps of John Mulaney and say that we could have expected his infractions, it is unfair to take the infractions of John Mulaney and apply them to Bo Burnham's missteps. I promise I'm almost done. I don't go to bat for white people richer than me, unless it's gonna make me money, so this video better do well. I'm putting Bo Burnham in the thumbnail just so I can rake in the bag. But importantly, if you are waiting on a moment for Bo Burnham to quote-unquote betray you, he probably already did it a decade ago when he was frequently making racist, misogynistic, ableist, and homophobic jokes in all of his sets and tours, dropping slurs like nobody's business under the guise of self-aware irony. If you are waiting for Bo Burnham to betray your politics, he did it a very long time ago. I recently came across a TikTok from a black person who had attended one of his college circuit shows way back in the day, and at the time, he had a joke where he singled out black women in the audience and said he'd love to have a black girlfriend so that they could 6ix9ine and he could call it yin and yang. And then he would mention it so many times in the act after that that like the person would become known at the campus for being the target of that joke. And that's super quirky, right? Oh no, that's essentially just post-ironic targeted racial harassment. And it's fucked up. That person's TikTok is linked in the description if you want to go and support that person, because honestly, that behavior is unacceptable. And if you want to watch, view, support Bo Burnham, you should know about it so that you can speak on him accordingly. So this whole video is a bit inconclusive. I think because I wanted to believe that I had some sort of observational high ground and that if I felt the soil in front of me, I could somehow like jump to this conclusion that we could have seen all of this bullshit coming ages ago, but in reality, I couldn't. I was in the dark, you are in the dark. It is once more not our obligation to anticipate these things. But I wanted to know if I could because honestly, I'm really fucking mad at John Mulaney. I'm trans, and trans people are having a really bad time in America and globally right now. There are a lot of states that are trying to legislate us out of existence and torture trans children and take them from their parents and get them off of meds and prevent them from getting the support they need. The TERF or RADFEM agenda is not a benevolent one. It is one that seeks to impart violence onto us. It wants us to culturally evaporate. So Dave Chappelle having sided with that movement and John Mulaney giving him the stage, while that doesn't necessarily tell us that Mulaney wants us gone, it tells us that he sees the way he uses his platform is irrelevant to our material reality. He could not be bothered to think about it, about the hundreds of thousands of queer people in the base of his audience who have been targeted by conservatives for ages, especially in the last few years. It really hurts me, not because I feel like I know John Mulaney, but because I like his work. You know, he's a good writer, and he did something that speaks directly towards his indifference towards the safety of my community. And it makes me sad because it probably will never matter to him that this happened. So considering that he's not gonna watch this and I'm mad, fuck John Mulaney, okay? Fuck him. He did a really shitty thing. He did a really dangerous thing. If you're watching this video, I don't want you to just passively support trans lives. I need you to defend them. I need you to speak against transphobia. I need you to be accomplices to your trans friends and coworkers and family because there is a cultural war being waged against our existence that could end in catastrophic fucking disaster. And at the end of the day, what we have is each other and community and support and love and kindness and thoughtfulness. So I need you to think about what you say and who you give your time and money to, because things could go south fast, and we need you by our sides. Thank you for listening. And also, thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. I'm so sorry, I couldn't find a better place to put this read in, but thank you so much. Go to the link in the description to buy raycon.com/row to get 15% off of your order. Okay, we can finish the video now. Support me on Patreon if you want. I'm really bad at perks, so don't expect me to follow through on those. Only support me if you really want to. As always, thank you for watching. Take care of yourself. Take care of others. Be kind to yourself and be kind to others unless they are transphobes, and love yourself because it is better than the alternative. As always, it has been a pleasure. Until next time, bye. bye.